Hey, George, ready to record the podcast? What's the matter with you?
Tell you what's the matter, Joe. This movie. That's what's the matter.
You didn't like Office Space?
It's not the movie so much as I resent being tricked like that.
Who tricked you?
The movie. It's called Office Space.
How's that a trick?
If you're a space movie, then you should be set in space?
George, you thought Office Space was about people working in space, like Alien or something.
Of course. Didn't you?
No,
Why not?
because that's stupid.
Why is it stupid? If you've got space in the title, then it should be in space. Space Jam is in space. Lost in Space is in space. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is in space.
By that logic, then you should have been really upset with Space Jam, since it was in space, but it didn't come with any actual jam.
My God, you're right.
Oh, brother, let's start the show. Welcome to Does This Still Work? The podcast that looks at old movies and asks, does this still work? I'm Joe Dixon.
And I'm George Romaka, and today we're discussing Office Space from 1999 and some historical context. First, podcasty stuff. You can reach us at dtswpod@gmail.com, on Facebook or on Twitter. Please tell your friends about us and leave 5-star ratings everywhere. This episode's film is the annual pick of our TV Guide patron, Aaron. You too can pick what we watch and get extra per episode content by funding us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/dtswpod. Now, Joe, take us back to 1999.
So this movie is about labor. So the first question I had was, what did we think about Labor Day in 1999? The answer to that is, not a whole lot. However, I did run across this article from the Berkshire Eagle. That's a newspaper published in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. George, what's the headline?
A joyless Labor Day.
According to this piece, a century ago, union organizer Samuel Gompers said Labor Day should be the day when workers' rights would be discussed. He said it would be the day that the workers would lay down their tools of labor for a holiday, but hold marches, shoulder to shoulder, and solidarity. That's not a direct quote, but that's the gist of what he said. Derek Jackson, who wrote this opinion piece, believes Mr. Gompers would be disgusted by what Labor Day has actually become.
You mean an excuse to sell mattresses just like every other holiday?
In fact, according to him, Labor Day really should be called Gap Day, and he didn't mean blue jeans. Let me quote. Gap Day, of course, is for the CEOs of America, the chief excessive opportunists who now make 419 times the salary of the average worker. The gap has grown tenfold since 1980, when CEOs made 42 times the salary of the average worker. End quote.
And it has only gotten worse since 1999.
We'll get there, buddy.
Okay.
He then mentions a study done by the Institute of Policy Studies, IPS, and United for a Fair Economy, UFE. Quote, in its new report, A Decade of Executive Excess, the IPS and UFE report that the rates for chief excessive opportunists between 1997 and 1998 was 36%, to an average of 10.6 million, while the average salary for a blue-collar worker rose only 2.7% to an average of 29,267. The gap is so bad that even executive compensation consultant Frederick Cook wrote that gaps of this magnitude probably are not sustainable over the long haul without serious employee unrest, conflict between investors and workers, and governmental intervention. End quote. As we know, here in 2022, that sure didn't happen. Today's CEOs receive $670 in compensation for every $1 a worker receives. George, why do you suppose some Americans will raid the United States Capitol, go to school board meetings to yell at trans children, and freak out about immigrants coming to our country, but don't mind having the boss make so much and they make so little?
Because the bosses have spent so much money gutting our public education system and working to make sure that the workers don't learn the history of labor. And it's also the thing of, you can convince a man to do anything if you convince them that they're better than the person next to them.
Try to do the Lyndon Johnson joke. Lyndon Johnson quote.
Yeah, I wish it was a joke.
Right. As long as you can feel superior to another man, usually a black man, then you can do whatever you want to him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he's referring to white people, and he was correct.
And even in what you just asked, trans children and immigrants are being used as those bogeymen.
Yeah, and willingly, people go along with it. People, my salary hasn't gone up in years. Minimum wage hasn't gone up in years. But you know who I'm really upset with? Trans children. That's who my real enemy is.
Yep.
Moving on. I don't know how many folks remember this, but in 1998 to 1999, we had an NBA lockout. At issue was players' salaries, which owners wanted to curb. When the dispute was settled, the owners won. The lockout ended after 204 days, and the NBA became the first major sport to limit salaries of its players. It seems too many players wanted to play the game than to fight, and that's the result. Sadder still was the public reaction. Remember, this is a labor dispute. There is no cap on salary for Steve Ballmer, who owns the Clippers and is the richest owner in professional sports. But the people responsible for making him rich have one. It makes no sense. And yet, the average citizen was cool with that.
You know where Steve Ballmer got his money?
No.
Microsoft.
Oh, okay.
He took over when Bill Gates stepped down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was the number 2 at Microsoft for a long time before he became the number 1.
Well, I always consider him a number 2. George, read this headline from the Orlando Sentinel.
The damage may be long-ranging.
Quoting now, in the first hour after news of the settlement surfaced Wednesday morning, just 16% of some 1,400 respondents to an America Online web poll welcomed the news. A stroll through the comments would not be comforting for players or owners. As far as I'm concerned, they can stay home another 10 years. Spoiled, rotten owners and players, them all. I will never watch an NBA game again. Too bad the lockout is over. I don't give a rat's butt about the season. Basketball is driving pro sports as a whole to the brink of self-destruction. Shame on us for supporting these greedy frauds. Good luck. I will find something else to fill my time. The NBA starts soon? Frankly, who gives a damn? Could the players and owners have erred in their assumption that fans would come fluttering back like lemmings? End quote. I will answer the question. Of course they came back like lemmings. Have you met sports fans? These people don't give up interest in their favorite diversion so easily. Of course they came back. What I like to know is why they want to watch the players, cheer the players, but think players getting as much money for their labor as possible is outrageous. Basketball doesn't drive sports as a whole to the brink of self-destruction. Ungrateful pricks who think athletes should entertain them without any demand for compensation is what's self-destructive. You asshole.
Those same people complain about Black Lives Matter protests when they have violence injected into them, but those same fans will also riot when their sports team wins.
And sometimes when they lose.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, fans will absolutely riot and just tear up the streets and then complain about, the trash of the NBA, and they're all just a bunch of thugs as they go watch them and jack off to them every chance they get. But whatever. I don't want to get into it. Anyway.
There's a Stanhope special reference in here somewhere. I know it.
Perhaps. Anyway, in this film, a waitress gets harassed after wearing flair for the job. She just wants to know how much her boss wants her to wear, and he won't say, but he will keep harassing her about it. All the space is a comedy, so it doesn't get much deeper than that. In real life, though, waitresses have to deal with even more bullshit than that, as this 1999 newspaper article from the Montgomery Advertiser can attest. George, the headline, please.
Hooters waitress claims harassment.
I have no idea how this case was resolved, but I can tell what Jennifer Galladino alleged in a lawsuit. She said, quote, the assistant managers repeatedly made sexual advances to her, touched her, and used sexually offensive and explicit language. When she rejected the advances, the suit said the managers subjected her to verbal abuse. When Galindo complained about the harassment, she was retaliated against, written up, and fired, the suit claims. End quote. I repeat, I don't know if she won her case, but that sure sounds like something that would have happened in 1999. Hell, it sounds like something that would have happened today. Would you agree, George?
Yeah, I talked about it last episode with secretaries.
Exactly. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't cover at least one software coder for this history corner. Here is something from the Chicago Tribune, headline George.
Engineer reportedly knew of pay cut.
So what's the story about? Glad you asked. According to the Tribune, a guy by the name of Thomas A. Varlota is alleged to have wiped the hard drive of his FAA-issued laptop after he quit, thus destroying the only copy of the software. He later would say the laptop malfunctioned and the information was lost, but federal prosecutors believe he actually transferred the code to another computer, then reformatted the laptop to make it look like it malfunctioned. The software code in question was to fix glitches in the automated system used to relay flight information from the tower to air traffic controllers. I will now quote, Varlota headed the team that developed the software between 1993 and 1996, and then worked for the next 2 years with a programmer to ensure that the software met industry standards. For his work, those last 2 years, Varlota's pay had been boosted to a civil service grade of GS-14. A month before his resignation, Varlota learned his pay would fall to his regular GS-13 rate when he completed the project, according to the government filing. I don't know anything about this guy. I know he was indicted for damaging government property and stealing government property, but I didn't look up if he was convicted or not because I don't care. Don't promise someone pay at the beginning of a project and then near its end decide he's just going to get his regular salary. That's bullshit. Yes, that doesn't mean you can commit a crime just because your gig wants to fuck you over, but he would have had every right to be pissed and say, fuck you, I quit. Thoughts, George?
When you said that, he accidentally wiped this software and combined that with what the title was, like, I could get the gist of the story. It makes sense. Yeah, you gonna fuck me over? Fuck your software. Fuck your canoe, as the old, mostly racist joke goes.
I mean, where do people get off with the idea like, hey, I'm going to give you this project to do, I'm going to raise your pay, and then as you finish the project, go, oh, you know what, we're just going to give you a regular salary.
Yeah, where they get that is capitalism, Joe. That's capitalism.
That's got to be actionable. That's got to be a legal thing. It's just like, no way, you promised me a higher salary.
Unless it was in writing, no.
That's true.
Unless it was in a contract, it's not illegal.
Good point. If they just said it rather than writing it down, yeah, true. Okay, buddy, tell us about Office Space.
This was written and directed by Mike Judge.
As part of a Patreon reward, this podcast watched the first season of the TV show King of the Hill, which Mike Judge created. Beyond that, all I've seen of his work is Beavis and Butthead. Thank you. I know parts of Idiocracy, but I never saw the full movie.
This won no awards to speak of. So, there's that. Blurbs. IMDb says, 3 company workers who hate their jobs decide to rebel against their greedy boss.
Not really.
Yeah. Amazon says, a satire of the working world. It could have just fucking stopped there. A slacker takes a step up on the corporate ladder when a team of efficiency experts mistakes him for upper management material. That's one plot thread. Like, they really should have just left it at a satire of the working world.
Yeah, that would have worked better. Also, technically, he does get a step up the corporate ladder, but it doesn't really go anywhere.
Nope. In fact, it all goes down in flames.
Literally, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, so characters. We'll start with the peons. The ones at Initech, we have Peter, the platonic ideal of what Sarah Hagee described when she said, God, give me the confidence of a mediocre white dude.
When I first saw you wrote that, I laughed much harder than I did right there, but that was pretty funny.
Played by Ron Livingston.
The last movie in the theaters I saw Ron Livingston in was a 2018 movie called Tully that was excellent. I also saw him in The Cooler and Adaptation.
Then we have Michael Bolton. Shares a name with a musical celebrity, but listens to what could be considered the opposite of that celebrity's music. Played by David Herman, a man with 2 first names.
2 first names, and yet he was never cast in Herman's head. Anyway, he's done a lot of voice work on Futurama, Bob's Burgers, Moral Oral, The Simpsons, and American Dad. I was not and am not a regular viewer of any of those, but I've probably heard him on them when I did watch. His non-voice acting I've seen is Dude, Where's My Car?
Then we have Samir. His defining characteristic is that the people around him can never pronounce his last name, Nagana Narjar.
Very good.
Played by Ajay Naidu.
He had more problems with his real name than his fake name.
I know, right? It's fucking weird.
He did an episode of King of the Hill as well. I may have seen him on Monk and New York Undercover. I'm not sure. I do remember him in Bad Santa, though.
Then we have Tom Smikowski. Kind of like an old wise mentor, but also a peon just like everyone else, so who the fuck is he to be giving any of them career advice? Played by Richard Riehle.
My God, this guy works a lot. His IMDb goes on and on before I found out that he had been seen for this podcast in The Fugitive, episode 118.
And then we have Milton. He will burn this building down. Played by Stephen Root.
Steve Root is awesome. I remember him all the way back when he was in News Radio, the last role of Phil Hartman before he got murdered, and a sitcom to help unleash Joe Rogan on the world. To be clear, neither of those is Steven's fault. Anyway, for our pod, we saw Mr. Root in Ghost, episode 101.
And then we have the peons at Tchotchke's, the restaurant. Joanna. She's the same character as every movie she's ever in as the love interest, which can be described as the generic love interest. Played by Jennifer Aniston.
You might know her work better than me. However, the only other film I saw her in was Horrible Bosses, and she plays the wildly horny employer of Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but she spends most of the picture trying to get into his pants.
See, that is not a generic love interest.
Oddly enough, the girl or woman who plays Charlie Day's would-be fiancée in the film, she is very generic. In fact, she barely has any personality.
Then we have the one credited as Tchotchke's waiter. He's given a name in the film. His name is Brian, but there's no Brian in the credits.
Oh, really? Okay.
He's just Tchotchke. Like, they forgot they gave his character a name. He's presented as an annoying coworker, and while that may be true, he's the kind of waiter that customers tend to appreciate. Played by Todd Duffy.
He was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's all I got.
And then we have, at something manual labor, who lives next to Peter, Lawrence. He can hear everything that is said or happens in Peter's apartment. It is a good thing they're friends. Played by Dietrich Bader.
Besides the Drew Carey Show, Veep, and being a voice on King of the Hill, I know this guy from Jay and Silent Bob Reboot.
Now we have some management. At Initech, we have Bill Lumberg. If I am ever like this guy, I hope my technicians find a way to kill me. Played by Gary Cole.
I'm old enough to remember when Gary Cole was the star of a TV show called Midnight Caller, where he plays a late-night radio talk show host who solves crimes. It was stupid as it sounds. Has done other stuff I've seen, of course. I don't want to talk about those. If this show ever gets successful enough, I'm going to do a spin-off podcast where I discuss nothing but short-lived shit TV shows I watched growing up. Forget those chumps who wax nostalgic about The Office or Friends. I'm going to talk about Midnight Caller and Helltown. Does anybody remember Helltown? This is where alleged wife killer Robert Blake plays a Catholic priest trying to help young street toughs. In one episode, while in full priest garb, he gets into a fist fight with a guy half his age. It was hilarious.
Who would you want as your, ideal fantasy co-host for that spin-off podcast? Not me.
I don't know. I guess someone around my age, we could both reminisce about the shit shows we used to watch. But I have no one in particular in mind. Why do you?
No, I thought it would be an interesting question.
Unfortunately, it wasn't. I have no answer.
Okay. What celebrity co-host would you like for that podcast?
I don't know. Doug Stanhope.
Oh, that would be great, actually. I think that would actually work out really well. Then the management at Tchotchke's manager. And I'll say it again. If I'm ever like this guy, I hope my technicians find a way to kill me. This time, he's played by the writer, Mike Judge.
I hope they find a way to kill you too, George.
You mean that in the same causal way I did, right? Or are you saying that more, in general?
Any way you like.
Okay, then. Then we have consultants. They don't really have personalities, except to say that they delight in disrupting people's livelihoods so that the rich can get richer. We have Bob Slidell, played by John C. McGinley.
We last saw him in 7, episode 105. It's in the box! What's in the box? He doesn't say that, but that's all you need to know about 7. What's in the box? What's in the box?
And Bob Porter, played by Paul Wilson.
He was in Malcolm in the Middle and Cheers. I don't know any of his movie work.
So, one of the most common parts of working in cities in the US, or many other nations, is the fact that for some fucking stupid reason, we've collectively decided to all go to work and come home at approximately the same time, so that the transit systems designed decades ago for decades ago populations can get frustratingly and sometimes dangerously congested. This movie decides to drive home that point and reinflict that trauma on anyone watching it, as we see how Peter, Samir, and Michael all deal with this decidedly modern cause of hypertension.
And I'll say right up front, of all the things that has either aged or not aged badly in this film, this one has not aged at all.
Nope.
That is accurate, and I'm speaking to someone who does not even drive. I know this is an accurate depiction of our system in this country.
Yep.
Because most Americans do not want to use mass transit, do not want to pay for mass transit, think the mass transit is for the poors, and so we get this.
Peter is like me. He tries to maneuver, and as soon as he gets into a faster moving lane, it stops completely, and the one he just left starts moving. He gets frustrated as he watches an old man in a walker making better time. Then we have Michael. You know how Eminem is a white guy who raps? Who actually raps okay and is friends with OG rappers from when I was a kid like Dr. Dre? Michael is the other kind of white rapper. He's the kind who will listen and sing along to rap and probably gets a little thrill every time he gets to say the N-word because it's in the lyrics.
Non-stop until I see your monkey ass drop and let your homies know who done it.
One part of this that absolutely is anachronistic is that Michael is, rapping that instead of listening to Joe Rogan.
Agreed.
His appreciation of one specific aspect of black culture does not extend to black people. He sees a black dude and... All right, no, let me paint a better picture here. This is a black man, probably in his 20s. He's got a bit of a mustache. He's wearing a bucket hat, t-shirt, and board shorts with a checkered short sleeve button-up. He is selling roses in the median. He's got a few in his hands and a bucket full of them on the ground. He is smiling ear to ear. Like, the worst part about this guy is that he's selling those roses during the morning commute to work, meaning the only buyers are going to be the guys hitting on coworkers while cheating on their wives if they have them. Michael sees this guy, trails off in his rapping, and locks his door. This is racism overpowering anything near rational fear. What's this guy going to do? Abandon those roses to steal your piece of shit car that he won't get anywhere with because you're stuck in traffic? I'm not pointing out this racism as a problem with the movie. But I kind of am. It's not that the movie is wrong to have a racist character being racist. It's that this character will suffer zero consequences from anyone ever for that racism.
I think it's pretty clear that that scene is directed at the audience, for audience. Ostensibly, I presume Mike thought it would be only white, would see this and go, yes, I can relate to that. And also you're laughing at him.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's never really called out that he's racist, just like you see that scene and then that's it. But then a lot of things aren't called out in this film, actually.
That's a yes, Joe. Then we have Samir. Like Peter, he also acts like me in traffic, except that he wishes he had my proficiency with foul language. On Peter's way into the office, he stops before a metal-handled door, knowing that his immediate prior trek across the carpet has built up a static charge that is going to arc from his finger to the handle as soon as he gets close enough. That always makes me feel seen. It's about this time of year that the air generally starts drying out, making those zaps way more frequent, to the point where I've developed the habit of using my keys to dissipate that charge to save my finger the pain.
So another point for the picture. That still works.
Yeah, because static electricity, man,
It's still a
is
thing.
always in style. After everyone rolls into the office at their varying speeds and levels of energy, Peter is approached by Bill Lumberg to discuss Peter's lack of using the new cover sheet for his TPS reports. What's a TPS report? It's like Marcellus Wallace's briefcase, but not worth remembering to put the proper cover sheet on it, much less kill for possession. In a nearby cubicle, Milton is listening to the radio. I spent way longer than I'm willing to admit trying to decipher what he was listening to. I managed to parse out 14,000 Spanish coins were discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Spain. I am, as far as I can tell, the only human being to ever be even the slightest bit curious as to what Milton was listening to, because Google itself, the organizer of the world's information, didn't seem to have a clue what I could possibly be asking about. Anyway, Peter asks him to turn it down, and Milton mumbles about how he's allowed to listen at a reasonable volume between 9 and 11 a.m.
Interesting. I had this issue where I would, because, work's tedious and you need something to listen to keep your spirits up. And I would also listen to the radio. Initially, I would have it playing, and then I thought, I don't really want to interrupt people, so I just put on headphones. And initially, my boss was being a real pain in the neck about it. Saying, well, can't you just play it low, because I wouldn't be able to hear me. I'm like, you can just come over, or you can call me on the phone. I don't really need to hear your voice. You just call me up on the phone, for God's sake. If you really need, I'll walk over to
If you want, yelling at me from across the office is about as offensive as when you snap at waitstaff.
Yeah. So I'm like, no, I'm going to continue to use the headphones. It's been fine ever since.
Samir is at the fax machine cursing it out. This fax machine is a common enemy to all Initech employees and will meet its end later. Peter asks them if they want to get coffee, so they go to Tchotchke's so that we can meet Joanna, the love interest. Well, she's not that, not yet. He has a girlfriend, Anne, who is arguably worse than Vanessa from Back to School, and who everyone is pretty sure is cheating on Peter. She comes up in conversation because, for reasons that don't make any sense to me, she's encouraging Peter to visit an occupational hypnotherapist, which sounds like the US version of how Mao promoted ancient Chinese medicine when he didn't want to pay for actual healthcare for the Chinese. They're waited on by Brian, who is actually a pleasant enough waiter if you're a customer. Samir and Michael give Peter some grief about his cover sheetless TPS reports.
Is any of this wrecking familiar to you? Like a machine that wouldn't work at the office, or them bringing up a thing that you just made a mistake in and you've already corrected it, but they won't let it go?
Not so much the latter, but definitely the former.
The machines?
Yeah, things not working. Yeah. I'd be in jail. I'd honestly be in jail if I ever had somebody come up to me and non-ironically say, sounds like somebody has a case of the Mondays. On their way back to work, wait, before I go into that, how the hell does anyone have time to go to a restaurant on their lunch break? Most places have like a half hour or at most an hour for lunch, and way too many are positively neurotic about holding their employees accountable to only taking exactly what they are allowed. I've never sat down at a restaurant and been out in less than an hour, not to mention travel to and from.
Well, I will give this film a little leeway on that, if only because of the jobs they have. I can imagine them being able to get up from their desk to go out for like coffee or whatever, and come back to do the coding. I don't think that's the problem with that particular office.
All right. Anyway, they run into Tom in the parking lot. Tom has heard tell that the company is bringing in consultants, and that means layoffs. He goes away when they call his jump to conclusions floor game the worst idea they've ever heard in their lives. The trio starts to discuss amongst themselves what they would do with their lives in the framework of how Peter's high school guidance counselor would ask, what would you do if you had $1 million? Michael doesn't think Samir understands the point of the question. He starts to explain that the point is,
PC load letter? The fuck does that mean?
Huh?
He literally starts to explain and then says that. Well, according to IMDb trivia, the infamous PC load letter error that confounded Michael Bolton is a message that the printer was out of, or not recognizing the refill of, letter-sized 8.5 by 11 inches paper. PC stands for paper cartridge. Older model HP LaserJet printers commonly display this error. This error also occurs when attempting to print a non-letter-sized project onto letter-sized paper. So there's that.
Wait a minute. Was any of that information necessary for anything?
That was apparently improvised. The machine actually gave that error, and David Herman made that genuine exclamation, and it was apparently funnier than whatever you were supposed to say, so they kept it.
Okay.
I know, it was a long way to go for that. After the workday, Peter is relaxing at home when his neighbor Lawrence comes over to change the channel on Peter's TV because he doesn't want his good buddy to miss out on the free softest of softcore non-porn of a woman on apparently broadcast TV giving herself a breast exam. You can tell this was 1999 because nobody nowadays would bother with that. Today, Lawrence would text a link to Peter of whatever weird porn they just accidentally realized that they were into. Peter complains that he's positive Lumberg is going to have him come into work on Saturday. Lawrence has a brilliant plan. Leave a little early so that Lumberg never has a chance to ask. Lawrence does not offer to FedEx Peter a banana phone to walk him through a labyrinthine escape from his boss.
Here's something Peter could have done. Tell him no. He already hates the job. Just tell him, no, I'm busy. I got commitments. I can't come in on Saturday.
It depends on what his contract says.
I get the impression these are at-will employees.
Right.
So there would be no contract.
Which means saying no would make the company at will able to just fire him.
At a job he hates. So if the worst thing it happens to him is like, you let me go because I won't work on a Saturday? Oh, okay.
Well, you're not wrong, but also we are inculcated from kindergarten with the idea that if we are not working, then we are going to starve to death and that we deserve to do that.
Well, Peter gets over that pretty soon, but I guess
we'll get into that. At work again, Lumbergh is introducing the first consultant, Bob Slidell, or Dr. Perry Cox from Scrubs, with Tom stopping just short of proclaiming himself the next Nostradamus and Milton mumbling about burning the building down. At the end of the day, Peter waits, stupidly, for the last minute before saving his work, which takes an annoyingly long time that he should have known it would take before his Macintosh desktop closes to a MS-DOS-C prompt, making every computer nerd wince because we kinda like this movie and that was just stupidly incorrect. This impossible process takes just a skosh too long and Lumbergh catches him as he leaves his cubicle. He doesn't ask Peter to come in on Saturday, he just tells him that he's coming in on Saturday. This is why we need labor unions, even among database programmers.
My knowledge of database programmers is it's stuffed with a bunch of libertarians, so I'm not sure this is something they'd want to be unionized.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they don't need it.
Oh, they definitely need it. I think most businesses need it.
Every employee of anything ever needs it.
But whether they vote for it is a whole other thing.
Yep. That evening, he visits Dr. Swanson, hypnotherapist. Peter spills his guts about how his job sucks, with Anne rolling her eyes. Swanson begins to talk Peter into a state of relaxation that I will call cheerful fatalistic nihilism.
Did you come up with that one all by yourself?
I did, and took me a little while to figure out what words I wanted to put there.
That's perfect.
Then, before he can snap his fingers to bring Peter back, Dr. Swanson, or Friar Tuck from the Kevin Costner Robin Hood movie, keels over and dies of a heart attack. Anne, and I guess Swanson's assistant, rush over to him. But Peter just doesn't care at all. He just gets up, walks out, and goes home. This is the inciting incident of the film, in case there was any confusion about that.
Technically, this is sort of where the film kind of goes off the rails. Because I think it started out as a very good satire of how it is to work in an office, and then suddenly it gets into...
Suddenly it becomes a game of what if.
Yeah, and it also just loses it just loses track of what the story's supposed to be about. But go on.
At home, Peter does what I did when my former primary physician ordered me off my ADHD meds when I thought I was maybe sort of having a heart attack, which was 100% not those medications, but the insanity of my former relationship wreaking havoc on my physiology. But that means he said fuck it and slept. All day. He wakes up to 17 answering machine messages. Answering machines, for those youngins inexplicably listening to us old-timers talk about movies that must, to young eyes, barely deserve the name, are like if your voicemail that you never check was a physical device that used magnetic tape to store information. Most of those messages are from Lumbergh, monotonically, yet increasingly frustratedly, questioning Peter's whereabouts. As he's listening, Anne calls. She berates him for being under the influence of hypnosis while forbidding him to use that as an excuse, breaks up with him, and confirms that she has indeed been cheating on him so very much. He hangs up on her and goes back to bed. Monday rolls around. If Peter is still in bed, he must be getting ripe about now. At the office, there's a staff meeting to discuss new timesheets, while a second consultant, Bob Porter, is introduced. Tom is called in to be interviewed by the consultants, or the Bobs, and becomes really defensive about his job, which is to sometimes, not all the time, physically carry customer specifications to the software engineers because he's got people skills, and so that the customers don't have to deal with the software engineers. Then they interview Michael, that is, Michael Bolton, but not the one whose music the Bobs are brought to near ecstasy by. Michael pretends to also be a fan, while secretly harboring for the musician a loathing rivaled only by his fear of flower-selling black men. Lumbergh has Milton move his desk for the umpteenth time in his tenure there. To add sociopathic insult to injury, he takes Milton's red swingline stapler, which the company had stopped buying in favor of another brand.
Do you know the story behind the stapler?
Swingline actually made those for a while, but then stopped. And then they showed up in this movie, and there was such a demand for them that Swingline started making them again.
Yep.
Peter has indeed decided to leave his bed. He shows up at Tchotchke's to hit on Joanna while she's working, because that's always a good way to initiate a romantic relationship. Ambush her where she works in front of her boss and coworkers. He does this by asking her to lunch at a nearby competitor, because that's not a risky action to take as a server at the bottom of the food chain in a restaurant. Joanna, incredibly, joins him at Flinger's, as if his asking her there had the same adventurous gravitas as when Zaphod Beeblebrox asked Trillian to ride his spaceship after that fancy dress party.
My God. You are doing so many references for this episode, and to my surprise, not one is Letterkenny or The Office.
I don't think I referenced those at all. And yes, surprisingly. We're introduced to the pieces of flair that Tchotchke's employees are required to wear 15 of. These are buttons like I used to have all over my backpack, but smaller and with ostensibly less political messaging. In fact, Joanna doesn't really care what hers say. She doesn't see these as a valid way to express her personality, since it's required of her to avoid, starvation. We learn that Peter's main job at Initech is to retrofit software for the Y2K bug. Again, for the youngins. The Y2K problem was this. In early computer programming, when memory was measured in bytes rather than gigabytes, programmers used only the last 2 digits of the year in order to save some memory space. The hypothesis of Y2K was that when the clock rolled over from December 31, 1999 to January 1, 2000, that the older programs using the 99 would crash in a buffer overrun of some kind. Some people lost their ever-loving minds over this. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this is where the concept of stockpiling toilet paper for the apocalypse was born. Because there were news reports of people literally doing this because they thought TP would be the new currency of the post-apocalypse world. When that year change happened, nothing happened. I mean, nothing bad happened, at least as it pertains to the Y2K problem. The world spent something like $500 billion to prepare for this. As a Slate article linked in the show notes points out, it's the only recent example of something exceedingly rare in America, an occasion when we spent massive amounts of time and money to improve national infrastructure to prevent a disaster.
You know what's a miracle about that is that we prevented a disaster and there weren't a bunch of people complaining about it. As we do with whenever there's something's prevented, like, for example, we have successfully eradicated a disease. And then people go like, well, the disease is gone now. Oh, I don't have to get vaccinated anymore. And they go, well, actually, we got rid of it because of the vaccination. If we stop getting vaccinated, the disease comes back.
Yeah, or evacuations from incoming storms, right? Oh, hurricane's about to hit. We need to evacuate. Oh, there was a path change that we couldn't foresee, so it didn't actually hit the area. I was so inconvenienced.
But people do not appreciate how much disasters are avoided in this country. Oh, and and I just want to be one quick anecdote, and then we'll get right back to the movie about toilet paper, because you reminded me of it. I forget what year it was, but Johnny Carson, the king of late night back in the day of The Tonight Show, made a joke that we were running out of toilet paper. And that caused a run on toilet paper that it did actually cause a shortage, because people thought his joke was real, and they went on and bought tons of toilet paper.
Sounds like a War of the Worlds story.
Yeah, I guess so.
And if you want to know what that is and you don't, just go fucking look it up. We're not going to...
War of the Worlds, Orson Welles.
Yep.
Google it.
Back to the film, Joanna is shocked by Peter's decision to just stop going to work, but is won back when they discover a mutual affection for the TV show Kung Fu.
Which, as relationships go in a movie, this is probably one of the worst. Come on. That's all they have in common. But you're right. She's pretty much vapid. There isn't much to her. Then again, there isn't much to Peter.
Peter shows up to work after that date. He's only there to get his address book so he doesn't forget Joanna's phone number. Another anachronism in a current world of smartphones testing and NFC, near-field communication contact sharing. He arrives right when he's scheduled to interview with the Bobs. He goes into that interview, tells them how much bullshit he gets away with, how overbearing and overpopulated the management structure is, and how little he cares about any of it. He wishes them good luck with their layoffs and leaves.
Now, I want to point out that as shitty as Mr. Lundberg, his boss, may be, at no point does the boss ever call him and say, okay, you haven't come in, you're fired. And no time does the boss track him down. It's like he just comes in there, leaves, and then when he does see him, he just walks past him. It's no big deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's because Lundberg, in addition to be overbearing and monotonous, is also spineless.
Well, that's true. He doesn't want to fire people. He wants to screw them out of their money.
We'll get there in a second.
Yes.
At Tchotchke's, her manager, Stan, he had a name too. Mike Judge's character had a name, Stan. And he's just credited as the Tchotchke's manager.
Okay.
They gave the names to the Tchotchke's people and just didn't put the names in the credits. It's unbelievable.
They probably thought, who would notice?
Anyway, he engages her in a kind of relationally problematic conversation that exists on-screen, off-screen, and everywhere. The specifics are that she's wearing only the minimum 15 pieces of flair, and Stan wants her to wear more. However, he can't order her to wear more because he doesn't make the rules. So he makes it about her ambition, her motivation, and her attitude. This is summed up by Cheap Trick when they sang, I want you to want me. It's taking one's own expectations and desires and making them the responsibility of another without taking responsibility for that desire or expectation oneself. It's toxic, frustrating, and most unfortunately of all, common.
Yeah, it's such a funny scene, and also a very accurate one, I guess. They're like, I can't order you to do this, but if you're really ambitious, you would do this.
Yeah.
Why don't they just say, look, just get more flares? Just say it. Say it.
The Bobs tell Lundberg about some people they want to let go, like Tom. Milton was apparently fired years ago, but somehow, through a payroll glitch, kept getting paid. So they fixed the glitch, under the assumption that Milton will just leave of his own volition. I believe, but I'm not sure, that this is the genesis of things working themselves out in payroll, an expression that complex human resources problems can have simple solutions that avoid any unpleasantness for anyone. Or, wishful thinking. Counterintuitively, they think Peter is a breath of fresh air with upper management potential. Lundberg's disagreement at that is met with the Bobs questioning the utility of TPS reports. Then, to the tune of Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangsta by Ghetto Boys and Scarface, Peter comes back in a montage titled, Peter Changes a Few Things Around the Office. He parks in Lundberg's designated parking spot. He completely removes the door handle that zapped him. He pulls down a banner in the cube farm that asked of everyone, but no one in particular, is it good for the company? As part of the montage, we see him and Joanna at Peter's, watching Kung Fu with Lawrence cock-blocking him, yelling through their thin walls,
Hey Peter, man! Check out Channel 9, it's the breast exams! Woo!
The montage continues with Lundberg noting Peter's absence as Peter and Joanna are fishing successfully. Peter finally shows up at work, sunburnt, with a cooler. In his cubicle, he takes his catch from that cooler, debones it on his desk, and tosses the bones onto a pile of TPS reports, which I gotta say, felt good to watch.
Again, this is a comedy, so there's no consequences to this. But it's impossible for someone to be cutting up a fish in an office and a bunch of people come over to his desk going, what is that smell?
You ever been fishing, Joe?
Have you ever put fish in the microwave, George?
Where did you get your fish from, Joe?
From the refrigerator. And then initially before that, the store.
Okay. Freshly caught fish don't smell that fishy.
I'm not sure it was, well, he put it in the cooler, but still.
He literally caught it, put it in a cooler in ice, and brought it to work. It was living less than a day before it showed up in the office.
You don't think it would have smelled?
It wouldn't have smelled much at all.
All right.
Fish shouldn't smell fishy. Good quality fish, even from the store, doesn't smell fishy. The montage ends with Peter dismantling a wall of his cubicle, opening up a view of the outside world through a window. Peter's in his cubicle playing Tetris on his computer when Lundberg comes to inquire about, you guessed it, some TPS reports. Peter blows him off and goes to meet with the Bobs. Then Lundberg goes to Milton to tell him to move his desk again, this time to the basement, blowing off Milton's complaints that he hasn't received his paycheck. The Bobs inform Peter that he's being promoted. At the same time, they tell him some of the people who are next to be let go, Michael and Samir. This is where Peter's good luck and devil-may-care attitude run headlong into the harsh reality of U.S. capitalism.
The curious thing about that scene, okay, is he gets this promotion. He doesn't really want this job, but he lets them promote him anyway. Okay. But he's also specifically told, you can have 4 men working under you, or whatever the number is, and he doesn't think, well, I'll just hire Michael and Samir back.
I think the idea is that he would be put in charge of 4 people that are still there. He wouldn't get to choose who's under him.
Well, you've seen this movie more than I have, but I'm pretty sure they say he can put together his own team.
Yeah, then I guess he could have done that. Incidentally, right now, I have 4 people working for me.
Ah. Okay.
Nifty little parallel. Peter invites Michael over to his place to warn him of his impending unemployment and to ask about a plan Michael had to programmatically exact some vengeance 1 fraction of a cent at a time. Yes, now we move into the plot of Superman 3. And I could have sworn I've referenced that exact thing, like the plot of Superman 3, in another summary somewhere. I couldn't find it. It was weird.
I feel like you've mentioned it before as well, but I can't. It may be in us just talking.
Maybe.
Possibly it wasn't a podcast. We do that on occasion.
Yeah.
Not everything's on the show.
We can even talk about that in a post show of what we did today, because we did some things today.
We did do some things today.
They get Samir on board. Lawrence, too, is on board, having heard the entire plan through the walls. Peter insists that Lawrence is cool.
At this moment, and it was pretty obvious from the beginning, but it was at this exact moment I go, okay, this is a sitcom. This is a straight up sitcom with the bad boss, the unmotivated worker, the 2 goofy friends, and the next door neighbor.
This could have been a pilot. Yes. From here, we have most of the plot elements established, so things are speeding up. The gang successfully load the virus using what the youngins might think is a 3D printed save icon, but it is in fact a 3.5-inch floppy disk with a standard storage capacity of 1.44 megabytes. That's less than what it takes to store a 128 bitrate MP3 of a 3-minute song. While doing this, they're informed by an oversharing and crude coworker that their former coworker Tom had attempted and failed to commit suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, but had been massively injured and partially paralyzed when he was sideswiped by a pickup truck while backing out of his driveway.
Now, real quick, how would he know that? How would he know? He would know about the injury, obviously, but how would he know it happened because the guy was trying to kill himself?
Because it was in the script. It was 1999. Like, word did not move around as fast about things as it does today. There was no fucking Facebook for things to get posted on. There was no Twitter. There was no text messaging. So it would have been like plain old telephone system grapevine.
But who would, I mean,
You're right.
No,
who would have done that? Who would have fucking talked about that? Nobody.
Yeah, because how would he know? He tried to kill himself. His wife doesn't know what he's doing. Just said, okay, honey, he drives out and gets into my car. He would not have told anybody about the rest of it, that he was there trying to kill himself. So how would he know that? Mike Judge, you messed up right there.
Lest that accident seem unlikely, most auto accidents happen near one's home, resulting from a combination of, that's where we usually are, duh, and complacency in familiar surroundings. Anyway, Tom is throwing a barbecue and they're all invited.
The one thing I'll give credit to about that accident is that they say it's a drunk driver, because usually, and we've both seen this in a ton of movies and TV shows, where someone will stand on the street or a car will be in the street and then be suddenly hit out of nowhere. And like, if this was an accident, wouldn't someone be honking their horn or something? They just hit them like. But in this case, the guy's drunk, so they explain it.
Yeah. Because they had to be drunk because there were no cell phones for them to be distracted by.
Well, remember, the radio is also a distractor.
As this is Michael and Samir's last day, Peter swipes the damned fax machine, the bane of their existence, as a going-away gift to be brutally executed in an unnamed field with no witnesses and no one to mourn it.
Which again, all right, office property missing, someone would notice.
Yeah, someone might notice, but nobody would care.
Don't want to care. I think it's got to be replaced, though.
Yes, it does. And what a glorious thing that is, Joe.
But they don't have to explain what happened to the last one. It wouldn't just be a plot point. It's something.
Spontaneous combustion. On the way to the party, Peter tells Joanna about the scam, despite specifically including girlfriends in his verbal list of people not to tell about it. No matter how hard he tries, which isn't all that hard, Peter can't make this sound like anything but what it is. theft. At the party, Tom introduces them to his prototype jump to conclusions mat that, while it might seem silly, I think if properly implemented could be a niche hit within atheist meetups.
That's interesting. Okay.
Frame it like a critical thinking thing, right? At the party, the annoying coworker from earlier tells Peter that Joanna used to sleep with Lumberg. Despite knowing full well that there are two Lumbergs and that one of them isn't their boss, that coworker doesn't think to specify which one he's talking about. Of course, Peter's mind immediately jumps to his single-note asshole of a boss, and it ignites in him a fierce flame of sex-shaming jealousy. In the car, on the way home, he badgers Joanna about her past relationship with a guy named Lumberg. She correctly tells him that her sexual past is absolutely none of his business. This true statement does not affect Peter at all, and Joanna gets sick of him, telling him to pull over so she can make her own way home. Which I will give credit to Joanna, the character here, for having a little bit more depth than we were maybe giving her credit for earlier.
Okay.
In that he violates a boundary, continues to violate that boundary after it's made clear that he's violating a boundary, and then says, well, fuck you, I'm out.
Yeah. And it's such a weird... that thing is so clearly in the script just for him to have a conflict with her, because that conversation really makes no sense.
It's way less funny than, you sucked 37 dicks? Try not to suck any dick on the way through the parking lot.
That is funnier, I admit. But then Clerks is funnier than this movie.
Yes. Good point, Joe. And both involve an element of I'm not even supposed to be here today.
True. And ostensibly, it also involves mediocre white men.
Yes, it does. Oh, by the way, there is a black man in this movie. He was a lawyer at that party telling Michael and Samir that, no, even minimum security prison is no cakewalk.
Well, and also there's the black guy who they buy the subscriptions from, and they do the joke,
oh, yeah.
Why do I need subscription to Vibe magazine, whatever it was.
That's Orlando Bloom.
That's right, yeah.
Peter has a nightmare about Lumberg, naked, with his coffee mug, holding the foot of and thrusting slowly and presumably into Joanna, as he says,
go ahead and just move a little bit to the left. That's it. Great. Peter, what's happening? Could you give me those TPS reports ASAP? Okay.
At work, Joanna is once again approached by her manager about her lack of expected flair. She responds with middle fingers and quits. Or was fired. I'm not sure which.
She definitely quit. She definitely got that middle finger up before he had a chance to tell her that she was gone.
The next day, Peter tries to console himself with the knowledge that their scam is underway and properly obfuscated. Well, that doesn't work because Michael, in his own words, must have put a decimal point in the wrong place or something. Peter and Samir are pissed and everyone is worried. Back at the office, it's Lumberg's birthday. The whole office sings and everyone gets a piece of cake. Everyone, that is, except for Milton. Poor Milton. And I really do feel bad for him in that moment. Everyone around him's eating cake. Like he did the thing, he passed it along, and then the person that was supposed to pass it to him just fucking stopped.
Well, everyone's needlessly cruel to him, and also they seem to be in on it that he's not working there anymore.
And they're using it as an excuse to treat him like a lesser person.
Yeah, rather than saying, dude, they fired you, and that's why you're not getting your paycheck. Which, by the way, I would think, well, listen, as someone who once did not get his paycheck for a job, that's when you go to court. Because whether they fired you or not, I'm showing up, I'm doing my job, where's my money?
Yep. The criminal trio will spend a lot of the rest of the movie trying to come up with ways out of their purloining predicament. This will involve looking up money laundering in a dictionary, being sold 50 subscriptions to Vibe magazine by a fake former drug addict, played by Orlando Bloom, and a nightmare about being sentenced to, and I quote, a federal pound-me-in-the-ass prison. Because if the movies we've seen for this show have taught us anything, it's that screenwriters think the public will always see prison sex, rape or not, as funny.
Hands down. That is definitely a thing proven by all the movies we've watched, is for some reason screenwriters think the idea of prison rape is hilarious. Well, except American History X, where apparently being raped makes you a better person. Makes you less racist.
Right. It's a way to stop being racist. Just like falling down the stairs.
Yes, exactly.
That was a reference to Crash, if anyone's missed out on that lovely little jaunt we took with no illusions. Ultimately, Peter decides to take the blame and return the money. He tracks Joanna down at her new job at Flingers, where she liked the uniforms better anyway and doesn't have to deal with pieces of flair. She accepts his apology way too quickly for the assholery he displayed. The kind that speaks to seriously deep-seated beliefs about things this movie could never aspire to consider. And that's it for her in the movie.
Yep, disappeared.
Once she's forgiven him, her role is fulfilled because men can never suffer the consequences of their shitty actions if they're the protagonist.
Hey, what's the audience surrogate supposed to do? I mean, he's the audience surrogate. Mm-hmm. He's got to have it work out for him so we can relate to him somehow. I mean, it would have been actually a stronger movie if you said, no, fuck you.
Yep. That night, Peter takes a confession letter and about $300,000 in an envelope and slips it under Lumberg's office door. He has a brief moment of relapse into naked greed, but is thwarted from retrieving the envelope by the size of his own man hands.
Oh, do you think that's what that meant? I don't think it was naked greed. I think it's like, oh my God, no, I don't want to go to jail, because that's what's going to happen when they get that.
Fuck it. I don't need to attribute any kind of nobility to this guy. He's an asshole.
I don't think that was nobility.
If only he'd tried the doorknob, which was unlocked because that's what Milton does the next morning when he's tired of being given the runaround between Lumberg and payroll. He just opens the door and waltzes right in.
Yep.
That evening, Peter tells Lawrence that he's probably going away for a while. Lawrence warns him to watch out for his cornhole because that's apparently the only thing about the prison system that we have to be concerned about. The next day, Peter shows up to find his entire cohort of coworkers gathered outside the building that is engulfed in the fires of Milton's wrath, as he said he'd do so many times. With the assumption that the evidence burned up in the fire, Peter and his co-conspirators are now in the clear.
Although that doesn't make any sense because the money is still missing.
Yeah, but it's not in an envelope with a confession letter from Peter.
No, I understand, but they would still be looking like, whatever happened to this money? Because in the film, they do notice the money's missing.
Yeah, but...
And then they had the fire, and apparently they forgot all about it.
Right. If anything, the bosses would see the fire as a way to bilk some insurance money, like claim that $300,000 went missing in the fire.
Quite possible.
So Peter quits that job and takes up with Lawrence's generic manual labor company that usually does drywall, but is now scooping the charred remains of Initech. Michael and Samir got hired at a competitor. Peter is happy where he is, working outside with his sex-crazed neighbor.
They never get into, well, is he making about the same salary or less? I mean, I realize this guy lives next door to him, so presumably they're roughly equivalent, but still, I presume a programmer would make more than the guy who shovels stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, unless they got a really good union.
Maybe. That evidence was not destroyed, however. Milton found it and is currently living his best life on a beach in Mexico, threatening to burn the resort down over his drink not being correct. The end.
All right, George, do you want to answer it, or shall I?
You go first.
All right, does this still work? I'm going to say no. I think it's a lot of good stuff in here, but also a lot of lame... I think it loses itself when it gets into the whole, hey, let's steal from the bosses, and then Peter gets promoted, but that really doesn't go anywhere. The female characters are very well fleshed out. There's some very humorous stuff in here. I can see why people like this picture, but as I said before, it's basically a sitcom. It is what I think Birdcage was. A very funny sitcom. Would have been better at 30 minutes or maybe watch as a season or two of, but as a full movie, no, I don't think it works.
Yeah, and I'll sign on to all of that. And also, stop with the prison rape jokes. Just stop with that shit. Don't let protagonists be completely shitty people and just get away with it and forgiven. And it's from 1999, and it definitely feels like 1999.
Yes.
Because 1999 was the only year anyone gave a shit about Y2K.
And would Peter really have hated his job if he had what we now have, where you get to work from home? Maybe he would have stayed at Inotech, because he obviously didn't mind the business itself. What he just hated was the bosses. But if he got to barely see the boss, he just basically worked from his home, and he could still occasionally do his computer thing, play computer games, and still do his job, would he have been happier?
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, he's a mediocre white man. And it's supposed to be a comedy. And yeah, some of the jokes are funny and shit, but they're wrapped around a really toxic waste dump of a character. And
Why since you taking that? I mean, the characters are so, again, sitcomish in the sense that there's not much depth to any of them. That I didn't take them that seriously as you did.
No,
you're unquestionably true. At least mediocre. Pretty much they all are.
The problem is that there isn't much depth to them, and what depth there is excrement. Sure, it's better to walk through a puddle of shit than fall into a pool of it, but in the end, they're both shit.
Well, then I guess that sums things up. When we get to the references to the picture and shit, we should move on. So that we both agree it doesn't work.
And I say that even after having bought this on Amazon because it was like $4.99 or $3.99 to rent it. I'm like, well, might as well just fucking own it for the extra buck.
How many of these pictures do you own now? Can you constantly do that?
Well, I rent them usually.
Yeah, but there's a series of films that say, oh, it's so cheap. Why not just buy it?
Yeah. If it's only $1 more than renting it, I can buy it, and then I have more leeway with how I can spend my time with grabbing sound clips and whatnot.
Well, anyway, to the fans of Office Space, you can write in if you disagree with us, but you're not going to change our minds. It's not a good movie.
No, because I went into this having an affection for this movie, and I kind of still have it, but that doesn't mean it still works. Because now is now.
Well, the same way I felt about Back to School. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of nostalgic feelings about that picture, but does it work for 2022? No, it doesn't. Except I saw this in the theaters. I remember enjoying it at the time. But yeah, for a 1999 movie, it's fine. For a 2022 movie, it isn't.
Yep.
All right, that's enough of that. So this was a Patron's Choice episode, but not the voted kind. This was chosen by one patron, Aaron, who's a TV Guide level supporter at $25 a month. A patreon.com/DTSWpod. Now, George, what's up next?
Next week, we'll be talking about North Dallas 40 from 1979.
So I guess that's it for this episode. I'm Joe Dixon. Thanks for listening, and vote blue.
And I'm George Romacka. Thanks for listening indeed, because if a podcast drops and there's no one around to hear it, it's just another collection of ones and zeros that doesn't matter.
No one in this country can ever pronounce my name right. It's not that hard. Nai-Najad.
Yeah, well, at least your name isn't Michael Bolton.
You know, there's nothing wrong with that name.
There was nothing wrong with it until I was about 12 years old and that no-talent ass clown became famous and started winning Grammys.
Well, why don't you just go by Mike instead of Michael?
No way. Why should I change? He's the one who sucks.
You've been listening to Does This Still Work? Produced by Joe Dixon and George Romacka, who can be reached by the contact page at dtswpod.com. Be good to yourself and others, because that still works.